for this amazing participation. I was not expecting, I thought we maybe would see 100 people or so this evening, but it's great to see there's like 600 and it's going down. It's great to see so many people tune in. I'm sure it's because you've got plenty of, it's not because you've got nothing better to do. I'm sure that it's because you're all fascinated with sharks and want to know more about them. So I'll do that in a minute. So firstly, to tell you where I am, I've snuck in. I haven't been in the Shark Trust office actually for, well, 2 months, I guess. So we've all been working from home, all in our separate homes, but we've carried on throughout. We haven't furloughed anyone. The team have carried on working, and you know, what we're doing is very important. So we just got to keep it up and try our best to work our way through this. So I'll come into the office tonight because then you won't have my dog and my kids interrupting us. And it's kind of really strange to be sat in. Actually, this is the storeroom of the office, but it's kind of strange to be sat here for the first time in so long. So if you bear with me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a screen, and then I'm going to we'll probably do about 40 minutes of slides, and I'm just going to kind of talk you through a little bit of what the issues are with sharks and a little bit of how we approach shark conservation. Everyone in here is, you know, there's 700 people here. You're all going to have different levels of knowledge about this. So some of what I'm saying might be news to people. Some of what I'm saying maybe, you know, people think, oh, I know all of this. Why are you telling me this? So I've tried to pitch it at kind of mid-level so that there's a bit in there for everyone. But if you are a policy expert or a scientist, shark scientist, you may not learn anything new this evening. So bear with me while I share my screen. A little introduction to the Shark Trust, what we do and how we try and bring about positive change. So this is our mission statement that's up on the screen now. This is kind of what we get up in the morning and come to work for: safeguarding the future of sharks through positive change. What this means to us is that we try, rather than kind of focus on where the problems are, and try and focus on how we can find solutions and putting solutions forward, whether that to be to policymakers or whether that's to fishing industry or whether that's to ecotourism operators or dive operators. Rather than focusing on saying, oh, there's a big problem here, we're always kind of trying to find solutions wherever we can to solve those problems. The work that we do has three kind of core aims. The first aim is what we call protecting wildlife. This is about looking at those species which are under threat, those species that are under particular threat, and how we can kind of create protective measures to ensure that their populations can be protected and that the declines in their populations can be arrested. The second part of what we do is involved with fishing. So it's basically transforming fisheries, trying to address overfishing, which is a massive issue for sharks. And that kind of falling in within that, there is the issue of finning. And we've been working on bringing an end to finning for over 20 years, and have been part of really of the movement for change, which has achieved quite a bit in terms of ending that practice of finning. And the other part of the fishing work that we do is transforming fisheries to sustainability. So where there are fisheries for sharks, it's about putting science-based catch limits in place. It's about putting science at the center of decision making, so that we can have fisheries managed in a better way, so that we can prevent more sharks going into those endangered categories. And then the third part of our work, really, which is probably the smallest part of our work, is looking at trade and looking at that trade in shark products, whether that be fins, meat, cartilage, trinkets, whatever it may be, looking at trade and making sure, finding ways to transform trade towards more responsible practice, and to really kind of support the work on sustainable fisheries. So that's the basics of what we try to do. And just an example, so threatened species, one of the most threatened groups of sharks is the angel sharks. There's beautiful angel shark here. And so the work that we're doing on threatened species is really focused. There's a big pillar of work on angel sharks in the Mediterranean in particular at the moment, where there are 3 species of angel sharks in the Mediterranean, and fishermen that are operating there often aren't able to tell between the species, or maybe they're just landing them as a group. And so we've been working over the last couple of years on a big international project to kind of bring together stakeholders, put a science-based conservation plan in place, set a regional action plan, and now we're working on some sort of sub-regional and national action plans to try to ensure that the angel sharks are recognised, that there's awareness about the need for urgent protection, and that those protection measures are put in place. So that's the kind of work, or an example of the kind of work that happens on the threatened species. On the fisheries side of things, a real big focus at the moment is on the Mako Shark. This is high seas fisheries. So on the high seas, multinational fisheries. So you might have, for example, in the Atlantic, you might have over 50 nations which have fishing rights to the high seas. And Mako is a species in particular, fastest shark in the sea, you know, fantastic, just such a charismatic, stunning, iconic animal. And yet they're being so heavily overfished at the moment that scientists have made some pretty dire predictions really for their future if we don't address that overfishing. So the Mako, as part of our No Limits campaign, is a really big part of our work at the moment, has been for a couple of years and will continue to be until we get the measures in place that we need. Onto the trade thing, this is kind of a bit more speculative really. The blue shark's an interesting case. The blue shark is probably the most fished shark. And those of you that are in the UK, blue shark is a shark that's really kind of, I think is gaining popularity in the UK. I think people are kind of getting this awareness that this is essentially a shark that is relatively common in our waters, certainly in the southwest, particularly in the summer months. It's an amazing shark actually. I mean, they swim around they do this big kind of circumnavigation of the Atlantic, and they call into the waters of 145 countries as they go around the Atlantic. So you can imagine management for those is a real challenge. Last year, after years of campaign pressure, the blue shark has finally got a science-based catch limit placed upon it. It's not precautionary as we might like, but nevertheless it's a kind of a move in the right direction. But then the obvious question from that is, okay, if there is a catch limit and there is something that's heading towards a sustainable fishery, how does then the trade in the products of that fishery, how do we make sure that that's managed responsibly and that only sharks that are caught through this management end up on the market? So there's potentially, that's the kind of work that might need to happen in the future once you've got that fisheries legislation in place. So that's a kind of a quick overview of the type of work that we're focused on at the moment. Us as an organisation, we're pretty small actually. There's 8 people that work in this office. We do a lot of the work that we do in partnership, so they work in various networks, depending on the scale of the problem that we're working at. So if we're working on something in the Atlantic, like the Mako, then we'll work with partners across the Atlantic, Canada, United States, and we're representing Europe. Other things, we might be working for different partners if we work on the Mediterranean. So we try and do everything in partnership so that we're not kind of creating ourselves as a massive organisation, but trying to bring people together to focus on what really needs to be done. And a lot does need to be done. A lot of change needs to happen. So quickly want to go through kind of how we achieve that. What are kind of the instruments, the tools that we have to achieve change. The first one, and probably the thing that we're most well known for, is this policy advocacy type of work. This is about essentially trying to make a very strong case in whatever policy forum there might be. So that might be something like the CITES, the Convention in Trade for Endangered Species, which is a forum that decides on putting regulation in place in how different species are transferred across borders. So we might be working on something like that and putting a scientific case together, gathering the evidence together, or it might be working on at fisheries councils or at these regional fisheries management organisations that oversee these big international fisheries. And we'll kind of gather together the scientists, trying to pull together the data that's needed and the evidence that's needed to support the policy change. But also it might be about kind of bringing in public support, showing public support. So in the past, we've done quite a lot with petitions and getting the public to kind of get behind our policy advocacy work, so that we can kind of show the policymakers it's not just us and a few of our friends that care about this. Actually, there's widespread support for this work that we do. I'm not going to sit here and kind of reel off the policy successes over the last 22 years of the Shark Trust. I think probably everyone has a limit to their patience. But what I will do is say that policy work is really kind of an important cornerstone of the work that we do. But linked to that, and really very important, is that working with the stakeholders. So if you're putting policy in place, then you need to engage with those people out who are for a living are effectively having to deal with that policy. So that might be the fishing industry. It might be, I've just put a couple of examples here. We do a Basking Shark code of conduct so that we can kind of set out, yeah, okay, we understand ecotourism operators want to take people and look at Basking Shark, but here's a code of conduct. Here's, if we all stick to these rules, then we can have interactions with Basking Sharks which are good for us and not harmful to the animals. In terms of the fisheries, you know, it's about providing kind of identification materials. I've got just to my left here, I've got posters that the kind of things that we send out to fish markets, to enforcement agencies, to make sure that there's no doubt about which shark species, how you identify them, and how you can kind of therefore make sure that we get all the data we need for the management. We also work with recreational anglers and, as I've said, dive operators, aquariums, you know, wherever kind of humans and sharks come into contact, we try and put best practice in place. And then the third kind of bit of work that we do, I guess, is this kind of citizen science and learning. So this is kind of getting as many people as we can to get involved with what we do. And I've just got this, citizen science is an interesting one because data is an issue for us. You know, evidence relies on data, and sometimes it's quite difficult to get. You know, you can't necessarily get a kind of a scientific program to gather the kind of data that could be useful in policy terms. And so this, the Great Egg Case Hunt, is a brilliant example. It's a project that's been running for 15 years, I think. And basically, we encourage people to go out and collect, look on the beach and look for these things, egg cases. And there are pretty much every inch of UK coastline, we have now had records of these egg cases. So this is egg-laying sharks and skates, which lay their eggs out at sea. The young break their way out of the egg case when they're ready to hatch. The young go off and live their life, and the egg case then just gets washed onto the shore. And so any of us walking along the beach, you can look in the strand line and you can find these egg cases, and we just gather these together. Behind the screen over there, there's literally a kind of a mountain of egg cases in boxes. And we get people to either send them to us or to record them on the web, on our website, or even we've got an app now for the mobile phone, so you can record those, and then we can bring all that data together. We've got 250,000 egg case records mainly from around the UK, which then when you bring all of that, each one on its own is probably worthless, but when you bring it all together, it gives us a really good picture of where the egg laying grounds are and where the nursery grounds are, and how we could then maybe put that into protective measures. So citizen science, getting people involved, and the other side of that, of course, is just kind of is that education and engagement, talking to people like I'm doing now, talking to people about sharks and telling the stories that we want to tell about sharks. So that's what I want to do now. I want to kind of go a little bit into I guess the education side of things, and what we're telling the world about sharks. So let's kind of have a quick journey into talking about sharks. And I guess pretty much the story of shark conservation starts with this. On the one hand, I kind of don't want to refer to this film, but on the other hand, it's almost impossible not to. and it's had a huge influence on shark conservation in negative ways, but also in positive ways, because many of the people that I meet in our sector, came into this sector because they saw this and they were inspired and they became fascinated with sharks. But this film does kind of, it's played a pretty important role in kind of influencing the way that people see sharks, and it kind of does build on the natural fear that we probably should have of large predators that live in the sea. But actually, I mean, one of the things that I kind of think is always missed about Jaws is that if you kind of dig into it, and actually if you read the book as well as watching the film, that kind of inside the kind of horror thriller film, there's actually a bit of a love story, and the love story is the marine biologist called Hooper, who actually essentially gives his life to the shark in kind of wanting to know more about the great white shark. And there's a little quote that's in the book that I just kind of think sums up sharks. For anyone that's been underwater with a shark, I think you probably get this. If you haven't been underwater, it may not come through. But he said that the sharks are beautiful. They're so beautiful. They're like an impossibly perfect piece of machinery. When you watch a shark swimming underwater, it is quite a staggering experience. I mean, they are just so powerful and sleek and effortless a lot of the time, and the way they glide through the water. They really are, quite stunning creatures. But they are nevertheless, these particular sharks, the great whites, continue to kind of arouse emotions and debate, and they create arguments and controversy, even to this day. And this is a picture that came out a couple of years ago, I think, of a particular person, Ocean Ramsey, who had some photos taken with this shark, which was at the time claimed to be deep blue, but then there's been some debate about whether it is more recently. And there was lots of arguments about this picture and whether it's a good thing for someone to go so close to a shark and certainly to appear to be touching a shark. But nevertheless, at the time, it did create a lot of intense debate in the wider world, and it really did kind of make people talk about sharks and perhaps a few people look at them in a different way. So I think it's kind of an interesting, and the great white is a very interesting shark that always kind of gets people's attention. But the great white is really, it's just one of many. And I think that's one of the things that's really kind of missed with sharks, and it's a bit of a shame because but the great white kind of sucks in all of the attention, and actually there are just such a fantastic diversity of sharks. I've just put 4x4 here of different sharks and rays, and you've got everything from on the right hand at the top, you've got the whale shark, the biggest fish in the sea, anything up to kind of 14 meters long, stand next to a bus, and a whale shark would be bigger than that bus in its length. You've got everything from that to to his left, you've got a dwarf pygmy shark, which if fully grown would easily fit in your pocket. It's the size of a Mars bar. Tiny, tiny little shark, but still a shark, but doesn't get the attention. You've got the blue shark in the middle, which is, as I've said already, does this amazing, travels this enormous distance in its lifetime, always on the move. And then to its right, you've got the zebra shark, which looks like a leopard. You go explain that one, which barely ever moves at all, which spends a lot of its time just kind of lying on the seabed. You've got a shark, okay, third row down, one in, you've got the wobbegong shark, which looks covered in frills, looks like a some sort of Christmas decoration, which kind of hides on the seabed and waits for its prey. You've got the basking shark at the bottom there. You've got solitary shark, and you've got more sociable sharks, and you've even got down there with the black spot on its side, you've got the Epaulette shark, which can get up on its fins and actually kind of walk on dry land across the coral bommies to another rock pool. So you've got this fantastic diversity, and I don't think enough gets said about the diversity of sharks and rays that there are. In fact, there are over 1,000 different species of sharks and rays inhabiting our oceans, and they are everywhere. I mean, really, where there's an ocean, there are sharks, whether they be big sharks, small sharks, bottom dwelling, rays that live on the seabed. You know, that this fantastic diversity is spread around the world. We in the UK, probably about 40-50 species of sharks and rays living in our waters. So this kind of diversity of sharks is something we need to celebrate a little bit more. And they're all very different, and they've all got different needs. They've all got different conservation needs. So we can't, there's no one size fits all. There's different things that got to be done for all these different animals. But there's one thing, they are kind of united, if you like. They're all vital, but in some way, they all play a role in their ecosystem. They're all there for a reason. Sharks have been, in one form or another, been in our oceans for 410 million years, way before the dinosaurs, way before the Himalayas rose up out of out of the plains, and they're all performing some sort of function in the ecosystem. They've all got a value, and whether that value is I'm not a fan actually of talking about the monetary value of nature, because I think nature it has a value beyond money, but they do have a value, whether that's for fisheries or for ecotourism, or for angling, or for for subsistence communities to feed their families. They all have a value in one way or another, but they are all vulnerable. They've all got this kind of built-in vulnerability. They've evolved very slowly over many years, and they just didn't evolve with humans in the picture. And they're particularly vulnerable to fisheries. That is their key kind of Achilles heel, if you like, because they're slow growing, they're sparing when they give birth, a few pups a year, and it takes them a long time to reach maturity. So those factors really don't make them well suited to fishing, and so many shark species are now vulnerable to overfishing. And overfishing is the big threat for sharks. If you take one thing away from what I'm saying to you today, it's that overfishing is the big threat, and that's really concerning in one way. But it's also, there's something positive about that, because we can do something about that. It's a tractable problem. It's something that can be resolved if we can get people to kind of work together. We can get governments to work together and say we're not going to continue overfishing. So you might say, well, what does it matter? What does it matter if sharks disappear from the ocean? And this is another thing there are lots of debates on. I'm not really going to go into it, to be honest. But I kind of think of it like Jenga. It's possible that you could remove the odd piece here and there. You could probably, if I'm completely honest with you, species of shark here, a species of shark there could be removed, and the world's not going to collapse. But if you keep removing pieces, if you just kind of willy-nilly keep removing pieces, at some point the whole thing's going to collapse. And if the ocean ecosystem starts to fall apart, that affects us. Now, whether you live by the sea or whether you live hundreds of miles from the sea is intimately connected with you and your way of life and your well-being. So it is important to put some effort into really making sure that the oceans remain healthy or return to health as we go about the next stage, if you like, of humanity. So where are we with sharks? Very briefly, this is the Iucn Red List is the best measure we have when it comes to conservation. This is a process that is they try to look at as many animal species as they can, or animal and plant species as possible, and the scientists of the Iucn and the experts bring together as much data as they can, whether that be from scientific research or from fisheries or from citizen science, bring together as much data as they can, analyze it and assess the status of a species. And if you look on your screen there, they can basically put them in a scale. So you've got right on the left-hand side, not evaluated means haven't got around to doing it, haven't looked at it yet. That species hasn't been looked at. You've got data deficient, which means try to have a look at it, but there wasn't enough information. We need more information before we're able to really say with any confidence what the status of that species is. Then you've got least concern. They're not doing so bad. Probably don't need to worry about them too much. Near threatened. Okay, starting to get a bit worrying. Vulnerable means they're moving in direction of their, their populations are being threatened, and they need attention. Then you've got endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, and then extinct. Potentially you could have extinct in the wild, and maybe there are some in zoos or aquariums or whatever. But essentially, that is the kind of pathway of conservation. And if you think about the kind of what we're trying to do is we're trying to stop that arrow. That arrow's, all of the human pressure that we put upon species is pushing, I don't know if I'm pointing the right way, is pushing animals more and more, and plants. It's pushing species further and further along that continuum towards vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered. Those three, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, are what we call the categories of threat. Those are the three categories that if you're in one of those categories, then you need to take action. And so our job, let's imagine that the arrow is going that way. I don't know. If the arrow is going out that way, our job is trying to push the arrow back in the opposite direction, to arrest it and hopefully to move things back in the other direction. So where are we with sharks? There was a piece of work done in between about 2013 and 2015, and this global priorities was released in 2015. It's a 10-year strategy, which really kind of looked at what the status of all shark and ray populations and where the priorities were and what we needed to do to safeguard the whole kind of picture, not focusing on one or two species, but looking at the whole picture. And within this, you can download this from our website. If you Google Shark Trust Global Strategy, you can get this document. It's quite an easy read. It's about 20 pages, and it's still relevant. Obviously, it needs a review because it's 5 years old, but it's a really good introduction to shark conservation. But within that, it has this pie chart. Everyone loves a pie chart. Show me the next slide, please. We have on here, you can see, so those categories that we talked about on the red list. You've got least concern, that's the chunk round about a quarter-ish of all shark and ray species. So 1,038 species they looked at, 258 of those were in that category of least concern. So essentially we can basically worry about them a little bit later if we're prioritizing. Then you've got near threatened, 127, so I guess around about an eighth near threatened, which means that they're currently not considered threatened, but they're moving very much in that direction. And then you've got yellow, orange, red, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, which are the three categories where we consider that urgent conservation action is needed if you're going to prevent a kind of an extinction. So around about just under a quarter are classified within those three categories. But if you look at the top of that, there's a massive great slice, almost half of it in grey, and that's the data deficient. So what that basically means is that of those 1,038 species, 472 of them don't know enough about them to even put a category on them. So within those, there may be some that are, if they were able to assess them, they might be of least concern. There might be some which are critically endangered. There might be some that are already extinct. But the simple fact is that there's so much work still to be done just to be able to assess the status of all of those 1,000+ species of sharks and rays. So overall, the estimate done in 2015 was essentially that about a quarter of shark and ray species are threatened with extinction and require action without delay. So that's a significant task, right? That's some work to do there. And so that's what the strategy then looks at is, okay, how do we prioritize? How do we kind of move through this to make sure that we put all of our effort in as efficient way as possible, coordinated between all the people that work in the sector to try and address that situation. And there have been reviews. So I just chucked this one in. This is a Facebook post from our Facebook feed, which went in, I think, in December. Yeah, 10th of December. So at that point, last year, there was quite a bit of reassessment done. The Iucn Shark Specialist Group are going through a process of assessing as many sharks as they can to bring that data up to date. oceanic whitetip last year at the end of December was uplisted, downlisted, whichever way you want to look at it, from vulnerable to critically endangered. So this is a shark that we're probably all fairly familiar with, which is now being assessed as critically endangered. And there were many others that were reassessed. The Mako, for example, was reassessed as endangered, but there was also downgradings for the great hammerhead, the oceanic thresher, the guitarfish, which took the dubious honour of becoming part of the most endangered family of all marine fish. So there is, there's still, it's ongoing. There's more and more work to be done, and there's more and more concern, I guess. And the authors of the review were really at pains to highlight again the impact of overfishing. They really kind of highlighted that in the press releases that they put out with it, and so the overfishing, it's about focusing on overfishing and addressing that at every turn to try and address this decline. But data deficiency, I mentioned earlier, is really an issue. And if you don't know about a species, then how can you prioritize your action? How can you decide what needs to be done? And how can you monitor the impact of climate change? How or pollution on those species if you don't know enough about them? So that data deficiency is something that really needs to be addressed, and that's a big part of that strategy. So, and clearly that lack of knowledge, or ignorance, if you want to call it, about sharks is a real threat to sharks in itself. Just that ignorance is a threat. So that kind of lack of knowledge, I guess, is bad for management. But I kind of think it's actually good for, partly it's quite good for engagement and for getting people interested in sharks, because for me, I think the most exciting thing about the work that I do about marine biology is just how many unknowns there are. It's just that we're discovering things all the time, and that makes it really exciting and really cool. And I think we need to talk about that discovery and celebrate it more, and particularly for children and young people, that excitement of that we're learning things all the time. And I just got a couple examples of that. Basking shark, biggest shark in the UK waters, grows to 12 meters long. We've seen, if anybody's been keeping an eye on Facebook, on our Facebook over the last couple of months, we've seen a really good kind of return to form of basking sharks in the southwest over this lockdown period. Massive creature, swims at the surface, size of a bus. Until about 15 years ago, nobody really knew what happened to them when they weren't kind of swimming around at the surface in the UK. And it was thought that they perhaps went into some sort of deep sleep hibernation in deep water. And it wasn't until advances in tracking technology allowed a team actually from the Marine Biological Association in our hometown of Plymouth to track them and realise that actually they weren't going to sleep at all. They were actually just moving down into deep water, where they found a whole new food source, and they were chasing that food source around and continuing to feed all winter before returning back to their kind of summer feeding grounds. So it's kind of, this is really new knowledge, and we're still finding out more about basking sharks all the time. There's been some great kind of findings in the last year or so about basking sharks and whether they're hanging out in family groups. It's thought that perhaps there's some sort of kind of transmission there to pass on this kind of complex feeding interactions that they have with their prey. So we're learning new things about them all the time. The Greenland shark, and I could do a whole lecture, well, I've done a whole lecture about the Greenland shark, but really amazing shark, lives in deep water, eats pretty much anything. They've been found, the list of things found in the stomachs of dead Greenland sharks is quite amazing, but it includes things like fish, squid, seals, polar bears, moose, sleigh dogs. They just have this amazing kind of scavenger ability to them. And everyone always knew that they were kind of quite long-lived. And the estimate was that maybe they lived for a couple of hundred years. And in 3 years ago, I think it's 2016, so actually come 4 years ago now, a team of scientists actually managed to find out that, to the best estimate was actually they lived for up to 400 years, which is incredible. Suddenly we've kind of got this new information using new science, new technology to kind of reevaluate that and find out that this is thought to be at the moment the longest living vertebrate on the planet. So amazing. And the secret is all in their eyes. The way that they managed to find it out is there's a little crystal in their eyes. We all have it, a little crystal in our eyes that's basically formed when we're born, and it locks in information about the year that you're born, so that scientists can kind of take that crystal and analyze it and calculate the age of something. And so find something. If you go on our YouTube channel, I do a little, I've done a little piece about Greenland sharks and how they found out that amazing fact, because I think it's incredible. Bonnethead sharks, a couple of years ago, it was discovered that whilst sharks are always considered to be predators and you know, meat eaters essentially, they found out that bonnethead sharks were actually able to scrape a living off seagrass. They weren't just kind of eating it and getting rid of it. They were actually getting nutrition from it. So it actually turned out that they're omnivores, just like us. Then there's new species being found all the time. The number that I gave you earlier for the number of species of sharks, that's out of date, because they're finding new species all the time. 2 species a month are being discovered. And it's great if you're into this, Lost Sharks. Go to Lost Sharks website. It's a little screenshot from Lost Sharks website. There's a guy called Dave Ebert who does most of the work on these kind of rediscovering lost sharks and discovering new species. A lot of it he does through fish markets, but there's some great kind of video blogs on there, and tells you about some of the weird and wonderful creatures that he finds. They ain't all pretty. So it's really fascinating, Lost Sharks. I would recommend anyone to dive in there and spend half an hour discovering that. So I think with all of that, I think that kind of, you know, that joy of discovery should be talked about more. And I think the other thing is we need to be much more positive about sharks. I want us all to be a lot more positive about sharks, and talk about, you know, some of the experiences, the positive experiences that we have. Think about the kind of language that you're familiar with hearing about sharks. Think about if you pick up a newspaper, and it's got an article about sharks. You can kind of, I probably without telling you, I can imagine you know the kind of words that come to mind when people talk about sharks. I'm just going to show you very quickly. It kind of goes against the grain, but I'm going to anyway. Show you a piece of research that was done with aquarium visitors in the US that asked them for words that come front of mind when they think about sharks. Here they are. So quite a lot of the big words are quite negative. And right in the middle, you've got the word attack, which is a really kind of specific word, which is misapplied to sharks because it, oh, well, I won't go into it, but it's essentially a very negative kind of frame and a very negative way of kind of talking about sharks. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if we kind of saw more words like this? Wouldn't it be nice if when we heard about sharks, we heard about how powerful, incredible, how elegant, how graceful, the movement, the emotional connection that you have with sharks when you see them underwater, how valuable they are, how spectacular they are. We'd like to see more of these words being applied, but unfortunately we see too many of the kind of the previous slide. But I think it's up to every single one of us. Everyone, if you watch this and you are in any way convinced, or you were already before I started jabbering on, that sharks are things that need protecting, the smallest thing that you can do is every time we talk about sharks, we don't try and play down those other words. We just don't even recognize them, and we drown it out, flood them out with these positive words and positive descriptions. So we need to, if we want to stop people talking about shark attacks, we need ourselves to stop talking about shark attacks. So I'm not talking about it anymore. It's a really make a massive difference if we all just kind of talked more positively, and everyone can do it, and you can do it. And particularly the people on here who are divers, who've had those experiences, who you know, can tell first-hand stories about the time that they've spent underwater with sharks. Do it at every opportunity you can. Don't be embarrassed to talk about it, and don't be embarrassed to talk positively, because that will creep into people's consciousness, and you'll creep in and you'll start to drown out some of that nonsense. And we'll get to the point where people will pick up a newspaper and go, that is rubbish. That is not an actual representation of sharks. So that's my call really to everyone, is to, if you like sharks and you want to see sharks protected, the easiest thing you can do is tell positive stories about them. The easiest thing you can do is talk in positive ways about them, and try to kind of change around that kind of view that people have of sharks. So that's an easy things that people can do. There are lots of other things that people can do. I've already laid out in the last sort of 50 odd minutes that there is so much to be done with shark conservation. We're a relatively small team. We're a relatively small sector, actually. There aren't that many other organizations working specifically on sharks. And so they all need help. They all need support. And that can be just, you know, what I've said already about talking positively about sharks, but there are other more kind of directed things that we can ask you to do, and you can choose whether to do them or not. Well, what are they? The first thing that I would encourage everyone to do is learn more about sharks. If you've learned anything from me this evening, then about different shark species, or about their behaviors, or the habitats, or the science, or the research that people use to find out more about sharks, dig deeper. If you're stuck at home for a while, I don't know, and you're not allowed to go out, even though you are a bit more now, you know, dig in. It's all there on the internet. There's so much out there, and I just encourage everyone to learn as much as they can about sharks, and trying to broaden, move away from that kind of those big five, the big well-known ones, move into those other shark species and learn more about them. We have on our website, we do every month, we do a thing called a creature feature, where we try to put a little piece together, a little blog together about an unusual or a different shark or ray species. So keep up with the creature feature, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or you can sign up for our mailing list on our website, and we'll send them out to you. But you know, just try and use that time that you have to discover. Join us. I've got a little thing behind me saying join us. Our membership base is really our lifeblood. I mean, it not only does it financially support us, but also it gives us kind of power when we talk about representing a membership base. So every person that we can get to sign up and become a member, and you can join from, you know, £3 a month is the minimum level. That's a cup of coffee a month that you could sacrifice and put it into the Shark Trust instead. And that gives us a real, you know, that gives us real power to kind of do more and to spread the word a little bit more. But if you can't do that, then join us through following us on Facebook and Twitter or Instagram, and just kind of follow what we're up to and connect more with what we're doing and what our partners are doing. And thirdly, the last thing you can do is act, and that means do something. I mean, that could be anything. It could be getting involved in citizen science projects as a diver, maybe reporting your sightings as someone who goes to the beach. Find some of those egg cases and report them to us. Or it could be do a fundraising activity. We've got a whole range not happening at the moment, obviously, because all the events have been cancelled, but we have fundraisers running for us, climbing mountains for us, doing underwater challenges, doing cycling races. You know, we've got a guy, a James, age 9 at the moment, who decided during lockdown he was going to climb his stairs to the height of Mount Everest, so 3,183 times up and down his stairs to raise money for the Shark Trust. Last I heard, he was halfway. That was about a week and a half ago. I don't know if they've had to replace the carpet yet, or whether they're going to bill us for that. But you know, check him out and give him, if you want to donate some money, you know, donate it to James, give him some support, because I think it's, you know, things like that which kind of really make our jobs worth doing. So yeah, find a way to do something to support us or another shark conservation organisation, and we'll all be kind of able to do more and to achieve more to overcome this challenge that we face.